This is XY Spark, restoring holistic, healthy masculinity. Thank you once again for joining us here on the podcast. This is your boy, your men's life coach, Rolando, and you are in tune to the XY Spark podcast. This is the podcast for men, where we seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. And we are live right here on the three platforms. We are live on TikTok, we are live on YouTube, and we're also on the Podbean app. And you can join the conversation live on the Podbean app at xyspark.podbean.com. Today it's Thursday. The caption is Transformation Thursday. Transformation Thursday. And today we are going to be speaking about narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder. And, we want to establish definitely some parameters whereby we are able to pinpoint the difference between narcissism and self love. Because a person who is narcissistic and someone who demonstrates self love, it's two different spaces, okay? And we don't want to confuse the two because there are sometimes persons who tend to believe that, hey, I'm not narcissistic. I basically like to practice self love and self preservation. For those who join us live on YouTube, thank you for sharing your comment. I'm seeing the hearts, I'm seeing the love coming from YouTube. I want to encourage my TikTok followers to, keep those hearts coming. We appreciate, any amount of love that you can send our way for what we're presenting here on the podcast. It really helps us to reach more listeners. It helps us to become more recognizable on the platform that we're presenting from. So just type in the chat where you're joining us from, and we want to send a shout out to you. I want to acknowledge also all my listeners, all those who have been downloading the podcast, those are in India, those are in Asia, those are in Africa, those are in the Caribbean, wherever you are around the planet. We just want to say thank you for the support, and please continue to like, share, and subscribe to our podcasts as we seek to create a tribe where we are empowering more men to become the best version of themselves and help more men to learn how to normalize conversations about mental health. Why? Because mental health is not a myth, and none of us are immune to being impacted or influenced negatively by mental health. So, we want to talk a little bit this morning about narcissism. Why? Because it's important for us to separate the two, right? Narcissism is not the same thing as self love. So, we're going to talk about 5 traits of a narcissist this morning, right? 5 traits or 5 ways to spot a narcissist. So, I'm going to jump right into it because, as usual, our time, we don't have a lot of time, right? And so, because we don't have lots and lots of time, we want to just dive into our conversation right away. And we also wanted to remind you guys that the XY Spark podcast is a podcast where we seek to offer live life coaching calls in the moment, right? So if you have a question, if there's something that is going on that you'd like us to talk about, then we want you to know that right here and right now, we can seek to facilitate a conversation, right? Or create a space to have a conversation whereby we can come up with some solutions, right, to deal with some of these behaviors. So let's dive right into your conversation. The first thing that you will see happening in someone who is a narcissist is that they'll have a grandiose sense of self importance. They'll have a grandiose, it's like a false sense of self importance. And, if someone is narcissistic, we can see this happening in the way they conduct themselves. It's a grandiose, it's a false sense of self-importance, and they present as if they are someone that they are not, and they go about with this air. It's almost a cockiness that is void of true authenticity. All right. So that's big point number one. Big point number two is that a narcissist normally lives in a fantasy world that supports their delusion of grandeur. All right. So a man who is narcissistic, he lives in this world that's mainly a fantasy, right? He creates this perspective. He tends to move around or walk about or pretend to be someone that he's not. So he lives in this fantasy world, and this fantasy world is one that he has created out of his own imagination, right? To support their delusional way of thinking. So that's another piece, another part of someone who has this narcissistic personality disorder. The next thing that to look for that we will see in someone who struggles with narcissistic personality disorder is that he needs constant praise and admiration. Is constantly seeking praise and admiration from whomever or wherever. Doesn't matter where he comes from. If he has a pet, you'll hear him almost as if he's asking the pet for validation. Is constantly in need of that validation from outside of himself. A person who is narcissistic, they have a very huge sense of entitlement. They are very, very entitled. So, they believe that no one should ever say no to them. They believe that they should always get what they want when they want. It's almost as if the world should be at my feet or at my fingertips, and I should never wait for anything. I should never want for anything. I'm extremely and I'm very entitled. So someone who is narcissistic, they get into that space where they have this sense of entitlement. And if you are with a narcissist, or if you're in a narcissistic relationship, you can see some of these traits coming out every now and again. The next point that we want to highlight about someone who has narcissistic personality disorder is that they try to exploit others without any guilt or shame. They can be very, very exploitative. They get into that space where they exploit others, and it's almost as if they don't have any empathy. They are not able to feel, they're not able to put themselves in the shoe of somebody else. It's all about me, right? So they celebrate this idea of me, myself, and I all the time. There's no room in their psyche to give someone else any form of love, any form of expression of empathy or compassion. They exploit others without any guilt or shame, right? Someone who is narcissistic, guys, they tend to want to intimidate or bully or belittle others, and they do it frequently. That sense of intimidation, that sense of entitlement, that sense of being a bully and being consistent. So a man who is a narcissist, you will see him doing these things over and over again without even recognizing that it's not okay. He believes it's cool, and he goes around with this ear. But you can see some of these behaviors, right? The grandiosity that you see coming from him right? He does that because he feels that, hey, he feels an unrealistic sense of superiority, right? So it's almost as if he lives in a world that doesn't exist. And a man who is a narcissist, he lives in this pretentious space in his mind, right? He believes that he's better than everyone else, and he expect that person should recognize him all the time, right? That's the part. He lives in this world that is fantasy driven, right? So if his perceived reality, or if his sense of reality doesn't support it, then he lives in this fantasy world, and he tend to want to seek support or seek the company of others to follow him in this fantasy space that he has created for himself, sort of a deception, a thinking that's almost magical, like a pretend, like he lives in this, non-existent Disney world of a space that he's created out of his own lack of personality, right? He needs to be praised constantly. Why? Because he has a big ego, right? And one of the things that we want to recognize here is that there are two things that they don't go hand in hand: ego and humility, right? And so the more you feed your ego, is the less room you're leaving for humility, is the less room you're leaving for others to connect with you, is the less room you're leaving to be influenced, right? Or to be taught, or to be exposed to new ways of thinking. So that sense of entitlement that someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder, it causes them now to be in that space where they're always seeking for their egos to be fed, and they live in that space, and they're constantly craving praise. I need someone to be there to praise me. My kids need to praise me, my partner need to praise me, my employer needs to praise me, right? And we get into that space where I need that constant food for my ego. For those who are just joining us, thank you. Those who are joining us live on TikTok, we appreciate you. Thank you for being here. For those who are on YouTube, thank you. And those who are on the podcast, you're in tune to the XY Spark podcast. This is a podcast for men. We are here live weekday mornings at 5:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And our goal here is to seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. Guys, we have really practical and yet tough conversations here every morning. We also offer live life coaching calls here during the podcast. So if you are joining us and you have a question, you have a comment, you have something that you'd like to share, please, we welcome your feedback here on the podcast. And wherever you're joining us from, we just want to send a shout out to you and to say thank you for those hearts. Thank you for those likes. Thank you for being a new subscriber to the podcast as we continue to create a tribe of men and women who are making conversations about men's mental health more comfortable. And why I say women is that there are sometimes women who don't understand how to create that safe space for their men to talk about their mental health, because women see men who talk about their mental health, some women rather see men who talk about their mental health as weak and not good enough, and not matching the masculine code, so to speak. So thank you for those who have decided to be a part of the XY Spark podcast, a tribe that is moving in the direction to have healthier men who create healthier mindsets, because mindset makes a man or breaks a man. So we talk about that sense of entitlement that we see happening now from a man who is a narcissist, someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder, right? The sense of entitlement is because a man who is a narcissist, he considered himself to be special or better than anyone else. He expects favorable treatment. So if he goes to the bank, if he goes to an event, if he's at work, he, in his mind, because of his grandiose thinking, always believes that he should get special treatment, special attention, right? They believe everyone around should automatically comply to their needs. And if you are a man and you've been doing this and you notice these traits in yourself, then the good thing is that you can get help, right? You can get help, you can get support, you can get yourself into that space where you are doing more and more and more and more powerful work, and you're doing more and more powerful things, and you're growing and you're becoming better, right? You're improving your wellness, you're improving your mental health, you are getting better at it. So a man who has narcissistic personality disorder today doesn't have to have it tomorrow if he is taking the lead on it. All right. The next point that we talked about is a man who struggles with a narcissistic personality. Guess what, guys? He exploits others. Remember, I said he exploits others without guilt and shame. So he develops an ability to identify with the feelings of others, and then he takes advantage of them. Okay, that's what that is saying. So he lacks empathy, so he doesn't know how to. He's not emotionally accessible because he lacks empathy, right? And so he view people, through a lens of, hey, you know what, you're weak, I'm superior, I'm better than you. And so he uses that as a way to control relationships, right? And that is such a unhealthy space for you to be in. If you're a man and you have been looking at life through the lens of a narcissist, what do you think is going to happen to you and to those around you that you love? Eventually, you may end up being all by yourself. Why? Because hurt people hurt people. And if you're hurting for whatever reason, and if you've been living your life that way for whatever reason, listen to me, buddy. Let me say this to you. It's not too late to break the cycle. It's not too late to change. It's not too late to go on that journey of self-discovery. It's not too late to heal. The only way that it's too late for you is if you keep telling yourself that there's nothing that you can do. But it's never too late. And so if you're a guy and you're struggling with narcissistic personality disorder, I'm going to say to you, you can get support, you can get help, you can step out of that space that you have been stuck in, and you can get help. You can move from being a narcissist to be someone who practices self love. And practicing self love is just not the same as being a narcissist. Because if you love yourself, then you learn to love somebody else. And oftentimes the challenge is because normally a man or woman who is a narcissist, they have not really learned how to love themselves. They have a false idea of what that is. And sometimes, someone is a narcissist because of their journey, what they've been exposed to, what happened to them, right? What they experienced. But what we're saying is your past experience doesn't need to continue to be in your present existence. And that's the quote of the day. Your past experience doesn't have to be a part of your present experience, but you have got to choose to do things differently. This is your boy, your men's life coach, Rolando. You have been in tuned to the XY Spark podcast. This is the podcast for men, where we seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. We're just on the brink of wrapping up our presentation for today. But we want you to go out there today and remember that at XY Spark, we believe that there is a spark in you. And we will see you again tomorrow morning for another episode. You do have a wonderful day. This is XY Spark, restoring holistic, healthy masculinity.